That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Queer, the 9th film directed by Luca Guadagnino, which premiered in competition at the 2024 Venice Film Festival. It is being released courtesy of A24 on November 27th, 2024.
I know this director did Challengers,
which we reviewed. We also reviewed his film previous to that, Bones and All.
Oh, okay.
Often works with Tilda Swinton since the very beginning of his career. I believe with his debut, which was The Protagonist. I'm a big fan of I Am Love, also A Bigger Splash, and his Suspiria remake, notably Call Me By Your Name. That was a big one for Mr. Guadagnino.
What is Queer about? First off, it's based on a book by William S. Burroughs.
Yes.
But this story follows William Lee, who recounts his life in Mexico City among American expatriate college students and bar owners, surviving on part-time jobs and GI Bill benefits. He is eventually driven to pursue a young gay man named Allerton. That feels like it's giving us more context than the film does, right?
Well, probably from the publication
Novella
by Mr. Burroughs, which was written in the 50s and as a follow-up to a shorter piece called Junkie. And this was kind of like a sober phase. And there's also some significant trauma that was going on in Mr. Burroughs' life with the death of his common-law wife at the time. And also those obscenity trials for Naked Lunch. But it wasn't actually published until the mid-'80s.
What is your pull quote?
Guadagnino brings a punk sensibility to the Beat Generation in Queer, the long gestating adaptation of William S. Burroughs' pseudo-memoir, led by a mournful Daniel Craig as a lonely misfit devouring his own soul.
Mine. Queer is a strange, well-constructed effort that doesn't always connect, but I don't think it's supposed to. I did enjoy this film.
I did too. I mean, compared to some other things Burroughs has written, like Naked Lunch, Queer is absolutely cohesive as a text, but much shorter than this film would suggest.
I really like the cinematography.
Sayubom Muktiprum, who has worked for Apichatpong Weerasethakul and for Guadagnino on several other occasions. Yeah, it's beautiful.
The set design, the visual effects, the score.
Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross.
The soundtrack selections.
Very, obviously anachronistic soundtrack selection, as what my pull quote was alluding to. But yeah, I think it works really well. And I think that it works better in its subtexts.
And the performances from everyone are, I think, top-notch. Daniel Craig, I think, does a really great job. Lesley Manville,
oh my God,
whose character we'll get to, she does a really great job.
I wrote this in my review for the film, and I think I said it in my roundup for Venice. It's like if Tobin Bell played Diane Fossey. That's what she's giving. It is insane.
But the story itself's pretty thin. It's broken up into like 3 chapters and an epilogue. Chapter 1 is called How Do You Like Mexico? So the premise I read says that William Lee, who is Daniel Craig's character, is living or surviving off of part-time jobs and his GI Bill benefits. I don't think that's mentioned in the film.
I think more for Allerton.
So William Lee is just this, middle-aged queer man living in somewhere in Mexico. I didn't understand that it was Mexico City, but he's kind of just bouncing from bar to bar, picking up men. I don't even know that we understand he's a writer until we get to his apartment at one point and see that he has typewriters and manuscripts. But he's just this guy who likes men and is always looking for one.
And is addicted to heroin and a drunk.
And is a junkie, as he says. And he very quickly latches on to a man named Allerton, who's played by
Drew Starkey, who this is kind of his breakout role.
And his character is, half of William Lee's age, and he kind of presents as though he's straight. He's always with this woman, but he seems to entertain William Lee, and ultimately is sexual with him. So now William Lee is like sprung on this man and propositions him to move with him to South America, Ecuador specifically. And the reason for that is that he's read about this plant that, the name of which I don't recall, but it's basically ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And he in his readings understood that it has like telepathic properties.
Yeah, the Russians, the Soviets, and the U.S. Are doing experiments with it.
So he's very curious about that, and that's what gets us to chapter 2, Travel Companions. So we get a segment where the two of them, William Lee and Allerton, are traveling, and it's rough because William Lee is experiencing a lot of like withdrawal symptoms. We see them several times trying to get drugs to tide him over until they get to Ecuador. Chapter 3 is The Botanist in the Jungle, and that's when we meet Lesley Manville as this scientist, and she says she's a medical doctor as well, but she's in the middle of the jungle with her hubby.
Played by Lissandra Alonso, of all people, yeah.
And
Dr. Cotter is her name.
She's surrounded by this ayahuasca plant, and she agrees to help William Lee basically experience the drug. After he convinces her that he's not trying to steal her research, he's just trying to understand telepathy. So she lets him go on a trip, and so we get this scene where he is tripping, and Allerton seems to have an awakening of some sort, and so he vanishes. Like, he's done with William Lee. And that's when we get to the epilogue, which is titled 2 Years Later, and we see that William Lee literally drops out of the sky back into Mexico and visits the old bar he used to go to and sees his old friend, played by Jason Schwartzman.
Joe. Mm-hmm.
Who's also really good in this role. Mm-hmm. And learns that, Allerton came back for a while, but then left, but was kind of asking about William Lee. And then the film ends with us flashing forward maybe like 30 years. So we see William Lee as an elderly man in the same room that he was thinking about Allerton in, and just sort of imagining that he's still there. The end. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of symbolism, a lot of which gets piled up in like the final act of the movie. But I really connected with this story. I felt like I knew this character, like I've met this man in real life. So it felt very authentic to me, even somewhat sobering. Mm-hmm. So I have a great appreciation for the film. I just wonder if people who maybe tune in because they're curious about James Bond, I wonder if they will connect in the same way, because it does feel a little thin.
Well, I think you initially described it after watching it as soulless. Almost
emotionless.
I think it is, but I think that's its purpose, and I think it's a recuperation of an erasure of a generation of gay men. And there are a lot of, if we look back to the context of their lives and experiences, ways that we are dismissive of them, including Burroughs himself, who has a very, if there's any canon, he's really part of it's like the beat canon, but he seems to have been kind of locked out of the queer canon because he himself rejected those labels. But that's because those labels to a person like him meant death.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think it was easy for me to connect with that because I did sort of recognize this character. I'm just saying that if a person who doesn't feel connected to this sort of way of life and the oppression that someone like him would have felt, because the film is set, I'm assuming, in the early 50s, mm-hmm. would have experienced, like if you don't understand that or connect to that, then I think it would feel kind of emotionless.
Well, kind of how maybe something like Steve McQueen's Shame felt emotionless to me, about a male sex addict played by a heterosexual sex addict played by Michael Fassbender, who has a gay desperate moment in that.
But the symbolism. So one of the main ones is a centipede.
Yeah, that pops up nearly from the beginning, including with an early hookup he has. And a centipede is often a symbol of secrecy, and then I think that also kind of relates, because there's an evolution in this, a kind of an existential one, and I think that the centipede becomes how we see that snake formation in the end.
And then there's this idea of telepathy, which William Lee, Daniel Craig's character, seems very interested in, and we get a moment where when he is tripping on ayahuasca that he is sort of communicating to the viewer with Allerton, and that's when Allerton explains to him, like, I'm not queer. But I think, what do you think William Lee's fascination with telepathy is really rooted in?
I think that there's, I think we've had long conversations, a couple after already seeing this, but it has a lot to do with control and looking back and how that ultimately is destructive. And I think this thought of looking, like the quote from Nietzsche about when you gaze into the abyss gazes back into you. And in his search for this drug, one of the people on this journey asked, like, who are you trying to telepathically communicate with, your wife? And he wants to be connected on a level with someone else, but it's also an escape from himself because he doesn't like himself. One of the scenes where he went up to the bathroom is he's very drunk to the point of passing out. He follows him to this gay bar in Mexico, the Green Canary, which Drew Droege has invited him, like the demi-monde, and he says to him, I want to speak to you without talking. Like it's about connection, but to me it's also in a way that's about control and also about kind of selfishness, because when we're looking back, that's also completely from the self instead of looking forward.
We also hear about, because initially when William Lee and Allerton get to Ecuador, William Lee finds presumably a botanist who knows about this ayahuasca plant, and the botanist is like, I know what you're looking for, and I can't help you with that. Like, I can see that you want to get the same high you get from like opioids, heroin, whatever, and that's not what this is. It's basically like you're gonna like it presents a mirror that you can look at yourself and see what's looking back at you, which you may not like. So this might not be a positive experience, but either way, I'm not helping you with it. But there is this white lady American who's in the middle of the jungle who might be able to help you. So then we see them go there, and she tells them the same thing. Like, this is not the high that you're looking for. You're basically gonna see your authentic self. And you might not like it, but once you open that door, it is what it is. And I thought that was very powerful, that his character needed to do that.
Yes, and there's we see a scene from Jean Cocteau's Orpheus, the second film of his Orphic trilogy, in which Jean Marais plays this man who puts on these gloves to, in this version of the Orpheus and Eurydice tale, to go to the underworld to get his wife, passes through a mirror, and the first thing he sees is when he looks in this mirror, it says, I see an unhappy man.
Yeah. Well, the final, so at the end, when William goes back to Mexico and meets his old friend, hears about Allerton, and then there's this visual of William Lee sort of like being this giant looking into the hotel that he used to go to. And when he looks inside, he sees himself walking into a room with Allerton. And then Allerton puts like a shot glass on top of his head. And it's important to know that William Lee always walked around with a pistol. And so we see William Lee pull out his pistol like he's going to shoot the shot glass, but he shoots Allerton in the head, effectively killing him. And then we see a snake eating itself in the shape of the eternity symbol. So
with a tear falling out of
its eye. So it's like, the symbolism in the final act is very heavy and very obvious, but it made me sad because, again, I feel like I know this person and they are their worst enemy. And when you think about when this character, when and where they had to exist and to not have that freedom, but then to also make decisions that are harming them. We also see that William Lee is a very interesting man. He's well read, he likes to write, he's funny. And so we see him at moments being himself, and it doesn't get him the reaction he wants. He wants these men he finds attractive to interact with him. So then he has to find other ways, like encouraging them with money or alcohol. And all of that feels very familiar to me in the queer community that I'm a part of today. So I think that's where the sobering nature of the story came. But where I could see people feeling disconnected is the way Allerton's presented up until the end is if he is like the one true love that got away or something. And to me, I don't see him that way. I see him as like a representation of something that William was chasing. I
think as a false mirror, I think the casting of Starkey, he kind of looks like a young Daniel Craig. I think that he's continually chasing, and that's the danger of nostalgia, is always trying to be immersed and fascinated and romanticizing the past. But as you come to find, like Thomas Wolfe, you can't go home again. And when you do, like, you see all the cracks and everything.
Right.
I think that, the ending, the final end is William Lee as an older man lying down in a bedroom in this hotel room, and he's imagining the caresses that he once had from Allerton. And the very same kind of soundtrack music is playing over it that were defining the earlier sex scenes, of which there are several. And to me, that symbolized that it was more than just about the sex with this person. It was about how he felt about him.
Well, something that really connected with me is not as I saw myself as William Lee, but feeling like Allerton is this. William Lee convinces Allerton to go with him to Ecuador because he says, I'll pay for it. You don't have shit else to do. Like, you have this bullshit ass job that is going to be over soon. Come with me. I'll take care of you. And Allerton says, well, what about my freedom? Oh, don't worry about that. You can have sex with all the women in South America. I just want you to be nice to me like 2 days a week, meaning like have sex with me twice a week. But then we see, and so ultimately Allerton agrees, they go. But then Allerton signed up for more than he bargained because he has to deal with this man dealing with withdrawals. Mm-hmm. And then at one point it seems like what I think I connected with is this idea that people are always looking for something in a way that is only going to, it's self-destructive because the way you're procuring things and the people you're procuring them from are never going to be able to give you the thing you truly want, mm-hmm. which is kindness and intimacy and companionship. But so he's looking for that from Allerton, and Allerton's not interested in giving him that.
And nor was it possible really for gay men in this period.
Sure. But I mean, either way, it's like whether it would have been possible or not, I don't know that Allerton wanted to give that to him.
No, I don't.
So I think where I felt the sadness was that this obviously very smart man couldn't see that what he's looking for is not like what he's getting, but he's allowing that to destroy him.
Mm-hmm. It was reminding me, especially like the first chapters, like a Fassbinder film with their lovemaking in the hotel, or even another very notable German film from the 80s about a queer couple that I highly recommend, Taxi zum Klo, Taxi to the Toilets. It was giving me that. But then the journey into the jungle almost becomes like a Peter Weir film. Notably, William Lee is reading Malcolm Lowry's Under the Volcano, which is also about this hapless alcoholic that's made into an excellent film by John Huston. But another notion that comes up is William Lee says, I'm not queer, I'm disembodied. And you had also made the comment watching that you had expected something much more depraved, knowing it's from the mind of William Burroughs, right, because I'd had you watch Cronenberg's Naked Lunch. And in many ways, what Cronenberg did was fuse Burroughs' own life into kind of an incomprehensible novel, and that details his relationship with his wife, played by Judy Davis. And in many ways, that I think feels more like what the William S. Burroughs experience really was. And this feels a little more romanticized, having somebody like Daniel Craig play a composite of William S. Burroughs. It's almost more kind.
Yeah, for sure.
But I don't think Cronenberg was the person to kind of delve into the queerness of Burroughs either.
If a person is not familiar with William S. Burroughs, I do feel like watching this movie out of context and not feeling connected to this community, I do think it would feel kind of dry. The sex scenes are very meh to me, but I think that they're supposed to be, because these aren't these very like passionate romantic moments. They feel like someone who's really trying hard,
yeah,
to extract some juice. I guess there's a pun in there, that like it's just never going to happen. So to me, they worked very well, but I could see people thinking like, this isn't even that sexy. It's not supposed to be.
There's always this hint of desperation about it, and squalor really in this love hotel that they're in. But the one kind of intimate moment happens when Allerton he vomits because he's drank too much. And that's where he's kind, and that's where you see him, after his orgasm, tries to, makes this move to assist William Lee with his. And you can see that he's kind of overcome with this sort of joy at that moment that
William Lee is.
William Lee is, yeah.
But then I felt like Allerton felt like obliged to do it. So then that made me sad for William Lee. So I saw people describe this film as a fever dream. I don't think it's as crazy as I expected. I do think the third chapter where they're in the jungle with Lesley Manville, that's when it's a little wild. Because when we're first introduced to her, she has like a pet viper that's protecting her hut. And I thought that looked cool. Like you said, she looks like is out of this world. She's a lot of fun. When they finally have their trip, because, you know, they do the ayahuasca and they were like, oh, I don't think this worked. And then all of a sudden it appears they're like vomiting up their innards. And then there's this, and I knew this was coming because in the opening credits, I saw that there was a choreographer credited. So I'm like, oh, there's some kind of like weird psychedelic dance scene, I bet, like interpretive dance. And it is, it's when they're tripping. And I thought the VFX of that were really good.
And that's where they're communicating, they're talking to each other without
telepathy.
Without using words. I really liked that moment. And going back to, you know, how we always credit Cronenberg with body horror. This is disembodied horror, almost in that moment. That is because in horror, in the sense that there's never going to be any happiness for these people.
No.
And I think I like the anachronism of the music, because I think being queer.
And you mean that because the music doesn't fit the time period?
Yeah, it opens with Sinead a great Sinead O'Connor cover of Nirvana, who's also used several other times, Prince. And that's what I mean by like a punk sensibility, because it's Guadagnino is Gen X, and we're, you know, recuperating the silent generation here. And I think that because no matter what era you're in, you're always a bit discordant as a queer person, no matter how assimilated we may seem like we fool ourselves into being or not. So yeah, I don't know. I think there's just a lot to parse through, and I think that I had a lot of conversations in Venice with people about this, and it was usually, again, like with Baby Girl, there was a distance from it with a lot of the heterosexual people I was speaking with. But I don't know. I think there's just a lot to unpack with this film that's really worthwhile and recuperative. Here we have a film called Queer. I mean, it couldn't even get published until the 80s. And, you know, we celebrate somebody like Henry Miller for all his sexcapades. And although these people seem familiar and downright repellent, a lot of these characters and their behaviors, but I think that we still aren't accustomed to seeing something that's honest about sexuality and addiction, that like at this level.
But to be clear, this movie's not gritty in any way. To me, it feels very palatable. Like the sex scenes aren't super graphic.
Yeah.
I mean, even the drug use, we only really see him shoot up once, and it's like shadows and lights, so you really don't even see him put the needle in, really. And, you know, it's...
But neither is it romanticized.
No, not at all. So I really appreciated this style of storytelling for this particular story.
And Craig has played gay a couple times before.
And it felt very... I felt like his performance, he was really trying to honor this character.
I agree. He seems very human to me. Like there's the one scene where he's just sitting alone shooting up in his little room. That's, I don't know, one of the most melancholic moments in the film.
I could see him being nominated for something. I also could see Jason Schwartzman being nominated. I thought he was so fun in this movie.
I know that person too.
I know that person very well. And then Drew Droege, who I really like.
Yeah.
You had said that after the director saw his performance, wrote additional stuff for him to do.
I think he gave him a couple extra scenes because Guadagnino liked him so much.
And I was hoping we'd get even more.
Yeah.
Because he's not in it enough for my taste. I really was expecting a even bigger scene with him. But
even when you can see him out of frame, because he's serving, watching William Lee and just being like, ugh. And there's that moment where he goes to talk to somebody else. I believe it's, I think Ariel Schulman in that scene, Nev's brother. In Catfish.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, and David Lowery has a small part in this too.
Wait, the guy with the buzzed or the bald head?
That's Lowery.
Oh.
But Ariel Schulman, I think, was another of the group of homosexuals.
Oh, yes, that's right.
But Droege, and he's still, again, kind of out of frame, but he casually goes over the door to talk to him, and after castigating William Lee, and he's like, so let's talk about Porta Vallarta. So little has changed.
What would you give Queer?
I gave it in my initial review a 4, and I'm maintaining that score.
I think it's excellent. I would give it 4 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.